Well, welcome to Christ&Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst, and today we're going to be analyzing the new production release of Mary, the full movie of 2024, Mary, produced by Netflix and shown on Netflix, I should say, aired on Netflix recently, this in December of 2024, and we're going to be reviewing it from a Christian perspective, a biblical Christian perspective. And I have to say, reading the reviews on this movie, they are not very highly favorable of this movie. And I just recently was able to see the whole movie. I was able to watch it from beginning to end. And I have to say, I agree with the critics that this is not a very good movie of Mary. I've seen pretty much all of the depictions of Christ, the nativity scene, Mary, biblical movies, ranging all the way back to the 60s, even maybe, the late 50s even, the Cecil B. DeMille, the Ten Commandments, some of the great ones, and all of the ones in between, all the way up to the present time. And I have to say that this is not one of the better ones, to put it mildly. This is somewhat similar to what they tried to do a few years back with Noah and tried to depict him in the ark and brought in all kinds of other storylines and plots and characters that aren't even found in the Bible. Well, there you go, again, doing that in this production of Mary. So I thought I would get into the review of it after having seen it. It's fresh in my mind. Now, one of the interesting things about this movie is that the pastor, Joel Osteen, is one of the executive producers, which is strange. I don't know what part or role he played in the direction or production of this movie, but his name is on the credits. So he was some kind of a consultant, so I don't know what that means. I don't know how involved he was. I don't know what his input was. We'll have to find out and see if he speaks on this subject. What was his connection with this movie? But he's listed definitely in the credits, so maybe that was just a PR move on the part of the producers and directors and those who released this movie, just to have his name on there so that the people who listen and watch and attend his church or listen to his podcast would go out and see the movie. Maybe it was just for public relations, marketing purposes, but he was on there. And it does star some pretty famous actors. There is Anthony Hopkins, very famous actor, and he plays the role of Herod, and I think he did a pretty good job with Herod in this movie. As far as I can tell, the historical Herod, what we see of him in the Bible, what we know about him from secular history, I think Anthony Hopkins portrayed Herod, King Herod, pretty accurately. So what I wanted to try to do is go through some of the pros, the positive parts of this movie, and then I'll get into the criticisms I have of this movie. Do I recommend this movie? Not very highly, but I'll explain why in just a minute. Well, let's get onto first of all, let's watch a trailer of the movie. I think that might help, and then I will get into the actual review. The trailer is not very long, and it can be watched in just a minute or two. So let's jump into the trailer, and then I'll come back with my full review.
I don't know why, but I was chosen for this.
Mary, your birth was a gift for your mother and I. It was a miracle. But in exchange, I made a promise.
We have been waiting.
Great Herod, the prophecy speaks of the coming Messiah.
What need have we of a Messiah? Let it be understood, I am your king.
Child.
are far more powerful than words, child.
I don't understand how it is your will that I should marry this perfect stranger.
You are to have a son.
But that's not possible.
All things are possible. You've laid with a man.
No, Father, I need you.
You'll be put to death.
I'm gonna bring this child into the world with love. I don't care what they say. I will love you as best as I can.
This Messiah, is he real? Has he been born? Where is he? Tell me! Where is he?
Love will cost you dearly. It will pierce your heart. But in the end, love will save the world.
Okay, as you can see, a lot of action going on in this movie. And as you can see, not all of it, hardly any of it, you may not pick this up, but hardly any of it is actually found in the Bible. Now, some of the larger themes that are found in the Bible are in the movie, but most of the movie, and I timed this, and I found that one half of the movie, at least the first half of the movie, did not deal with really directly biblical themes. It was almost all creative storytelling, fiction. It is adding to. You might have one biblical theme and then they add on, 90% of the whole scene is non-biblical. And I was doing some reading on the internet and I found out that they had borrowed heavily from a book, a Gnostic book of the first few centuries after Christ, called the Proto-Evangelium of James. So they're consulting all kinds of non-biblical, non-canonical works. Many of these outright false teachings and were rejected by Christians because they were not accurate and did not reflect the historical accounts as they actually occurred. So a lot of fanciful stories were included in this Netflix movie, which bothered me, and it bothers me all the time. They did the same thing a few years back with the movie, big theatrical production starring Russell Crowe, of Noah, and they added all kinds of legends and stories and creative expressions and did not stick to the biblical text, did not stick to the biblical story. And that is very discouraging for me. When I sit down and I want to see a biblical character shown on the big screen, I don't want to feel that 90% of what I'm seeing is just some creative storyteller's expression of what they think would be nice to show alongside with the biblical information. No, I don't want to wade through 95% of the creative process of the producers, directors, writers of this movie, because I don't know if it's true or not. And most of the time it's actually not something that actually occurred. So it's very discouraging. In other words, can we just stick to the biblical parameters and then possibly stray from that a little bit creatively in the dialogue and some scenes, but stay very close to the original sources? No, they don't do that in this movie. There is so much creative license. In fact, it's not just a creative license that they took. They took creative liberties, and they were very permissive in going outside of the biblical boundaries. So that's the first thing that I noticed about this movie, is that pretty much fully the first hour of this movie was not directly tied to anything the Bible actually teaches about Mary. But before I get into the criticisms, let me mention some of the positives. I think the most glaring positive, as you might be able to see from this scene, is that the cinematography The lighting, the audio, the video, the quality of production is top notch. Very good. You cannot fault that. I mean, the camera work and all kinds of production details, it just spoke of quality. So it wasn't one of these cheaply made budget films that was done by a couple of Christian amateur photographers. No, this was a big budget cinematic extravaganza, and they put a lot of money in it. I'm not sure what the budget was for this movie, but I'm sure it was millions and millions and millions, multiple millions of dollars to get all of this together. And it's a shame that out of all of those millions of dollars and all of the time and effort that it went to produce this, that they didn't get a better result coming out of all of that effort. It also was platformed on Netflix, which is a large platform and reaches a lot of people. So a lot of people are seeing this movie. And again, it had some pretty important and famous actors, Anthony Hopkins being the most famous. And some of the newer ones that I have never heard of, they did their parts, I think, fairly well, although the script itself and the dialogue that was written was probably not the best and seemed awkward at times and didn't seem to flow. But again, give credit where credit is due. This was an attempt to do a high-quality movie on a biblical character, namely Mary. Now, what are the criticisms that I think are legitimate to make with this movie, and why does this movie not succeed at depicting the true Mary, the biblical Mary? Well, again, the first point that I already mentioned is that it departs from the true biblical accounts. So right off the bat, whenever you tackle a subject and you have a historical account that we have already written down in the Bible, and you start departing from it and adding to it and changing things, that is already a red flag, because you're saying to yourself, the writers or the directors, producers, what they're saying is the biblical story is not good enough, so we're going to do something better, and we're going to come up with things whole cloth out of our own mind, and we think that's a better story than what the Bible depicts historically happened. Well, you may think it's a better story. I think the writers and directors and producers of the Noah movie a few years ago, they thought that their rewrite of the actual historical Noah was a lot better than the original. But again, I think that's their egos speaking. But because in reality, people did not respond to that. And I don't think they'll respond to this movie, Mary, in a very positive light either. Looking at the critics, let me just go through here and see on YouTube. Here's a critic, Melissa Doherty. She basically gave it a thumbs down because of all of the additions and fabrications that were introduced in the movie. And if you look at the reviews, here's Mike Winger, Pastor Mike Winger. Mary is bad. My review of Netflix rewrite of Virgin Mary. So again, almost all of the Christian reviews of this movie are negative, and hardly anything positive could be said about this movie because of the way they interject their own version of things and add entire characters and scenes and all kinds of things. It's a mess, but let me go on. I think it will confuse people by adding all of these additional fictitious scenes and dialogues. If you're not very literate in the Bible, which is the case in most people's lives today, a lot of people get their biblical understanding from Hollywood renditions of the Bible. that's okay if the script stays closely lined up to the Bible, but in this case, you're going to have a lot of people confused. They're going to think that, for example, that Mary, let me find the part here. They're going to think that at least one point Mary was like a nun. Here's the scene right here. Mary is depicted in one scene as if she's a nun in a monastery, in a nunnery. That is not in the Bible. She's dedicated, her parents dedicate her because she's a miracle baby. They dedicate her to the temple, and she becomes basically like a nun at working and living in the temple. And then during the time when she is found pregnant with the Holy Spirit, she has to leave the monastery where these girls are like nuns, and she has to leave the monastery, and she happens to meet Joseph, and they get married, and it's just all kinds of scenes are added in here and all kinds of storylines and plots. And it's really amazing how convoluted the whole story is. And again, if you just stick with the biblical narrative and if you maybe build upon that, that's fine. But to go off into all of these areas, let me just show you some of the areas they go off into. First of all, they claim that Mary's birth was a miracle. We have no depiction of Mary's birth as a miracle. Her father, there is some kind of early legends and stories about the father and the mother of Mary. There is reference to Anna as her mother, Anne. And then her father, Joachim. But there is nothing in the Bible that says that Mary, her birth was a miracle, and that she's a special child, and that there's this prophetess in the temple, which is a biblical depiction. But the prophetess does not come to Mary and welcome her as a child into the temple as a special child. This is all taking bits and pieces of the Bible and legend and Gnostic interpretations, and they show a confrontation between Mary here and King Herod, where does that come from? And he has some kind of a flashback or flash forward talking about the resurrection of Christ and the crucifixion. It's just really strange. And then the meeting of Mary and Joseph, it's just very strange. Mary wasn't seen as a miracle child. She wasn't made a big deal about. She was an ordinary woman. That's what we get from the scripture. She was a godly woman, but there were other godly women in the land of Israel at the time, and Mary does not stand out as special in her younger life as the way this movie depicts. And then she's not presented to the temple and set apart as if she's a nun in a monastery. They also have Lucifer show up, and he basically is battling Gabriel over the life of Mary, which is nowhere in the Bible that says Lucifer tempts Mary and tries to lead her astray, and so on and so forth. And then it says that then it shows later that when Mary and Joseph are getting used to the fact that Mary is pregnant, there's this mob scene where Mary has to battle Satan, and Satan takes Mary and tries to kidnap her in this, I guess, dream sequence. And Joseph has to run after them and stab Satan in the back, and then Mary wakes up and it was just a dream, and so on and so forth. Just okay. Yeah, you can add all kinds of fanciful scenes if you're making it all up in your head. But, I mean, I think people want to know what the Bible depicts Mary and shows Mary as, and all of these creative licenses that were taken to bring about this movie. It's a very long movie. It's almost 2 hours long. I don't think the reward is that great for taking these creative license. Also, Mary's father was killed by raiders. They have to flee because Herod is after them. Now, that is biblical. Mary and Joseph flee to escape Bethlehem because Herod wants to send soldiers to kill all the children. Okay. But it shows in here that Mary's father and mother also flee with them. And then Mary's father dies in the process, is killed by the Romans, and the mother goes along with them. And then in one scene, the Roman soldiers are closing in, and Joseph sends Mary's mother as a diversion to distract the soldiers, and they get away again. Really? It's all fabrication. It's all made up. It's all storyline that isn't anywhere grounded in reality, which is one of the biggest flaws of this movie. Is that, okay, if you're going to spend 2 hours, you want to feel that what you're seeing is somewhat close to the truth. And when it's getting too far away from the truth, it really makes it hard to keep on watching, because it's like, well, you know, why should I sit here and watch the creative process of some anonymous screenwriter and their creative baby? Why should I sit here and weed through this? It's not even that great a storyline when they depart from the scriptures. Now, the scriptures give us a solid historical storyline that makes sense. But this movie, the way it was written and all of the creative licenses that it took, at one point, for example, it doesn't even make sense. Joseph says, let's go to Bethlehem because I have family there. And then when they get to Bethlehem, he's going from door to door and saying, my wife is pregnant, can we stay? And as if he doesn't have family. So in other words, he's acting like he's a complete stranger to this town, and nobody's letting him and Mary stay because there's no room at the inn. And he says, well, what's going on here? Why are there so many people in Bethlehem? And you know what the answer is? The answer is because the Messiah is going to be born here soon. What? No, that's not the answer. The answer is because there was a census in the land, and the families needed to return to their ancestral birthplace. And that's why there were so many people in the original biblical account. Not that they were coming in anticipation of the Messiah being born. And then if you have that as the actual reason, the people are swarming Bethlehem because they're anticipating the birth of a Messiah. Well, here's a pregnant woman who you would think the people would be looking at and saying, are you the mother of the Messiah? No, they ignore her. And when Joseph comes to the door of these homes and says, my wife is pregnant, they don't say, oh, maybe your wife is the mother of the Messiah, we should let you in. No, they ignore a pregnant woman as if she's not going to give birth to the Messiah when they're all there looking in anticipating the birth of the Messiah. It doesn't make sense. It's all convoluted. It's contradictory. It's just a hodgepodge of scenes thrown together to try to make an interesting movie. And we don't need writers and directors and producers to try to make the Bible compelling and make the Bible interesting, because it already is. And we don't need their help to produce a movie that really isn't interesting. They also say, they also show that instead of escaping to Egypt, the baby Jesus escaping to Egypt, they go to the temple, and it shows all kinds of different things happening. But again, it's a very confused jumble. And at one scene, in the Bethlehem scene, it shows outside the stable where Mary and Joseph and Jesus are after the birth, shows a huge crowd of people. It shows, hundreds of people, as if instead of, a few lowly shepherds coming in because angels told them, it shows a huge crowd. So how did they find out? Again, no explanations. We're left hanging. Also, another flaw in the movie is Joseph, when he finds out his wife is pregnant. Obviously, this is a problem. It was in the biblical, historical accounts. But when she asked him, "Are you going to stay with me?" He says, "Yes, because I feel it's the right thing to do," or whatever. And not an angel appeared to me and told me that you are carrying the Messiah. No, it's just like, I just feel like this is the right thing to do. What? Again, actually omitting parts of the true biblical account in favor of some contrived man-made explanation, like just wanting to do the right thing, or being faithful to his girlfriend, Mary. It just doesn't make sense. It didn't work in the movie. And that's why I don't recommend this movie. And I mean, you could watch the movie if you wanted to, just to see how they essentially distort the vision of the true account of Mary. But if you want to save yourself a couple of hours, you could just skip this one and go back to one I would say is about 15 or 20 years old, and that's the Nativity. Now, they basically followed the biblical script in the Nativity movie, and they had the quality of production still high in the Nativity movie. But then when they did take creative license, they did so in a more modest way, in a more restrained way, subdued way. Not like this modern day Mary movie that just takes way too many liberties with the biblical script, omitting the biblical script at times when they could have included it, and then adding so much man-made, contrived storyline. It's just not a very good approach at all, and I don't recommend it very highly at all. Well, that's my review, and we'll see you back next week. God bless.